"If you tame that wild bull, I'll marry you today." That's how the heiress challenged the farmer. No one believed the beast could be subdued without force. But he didn't fight it. He watched, waited, and earned its trust. The dare turned into legend, and love rose where fear once ruled. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. After 30 years of corporate life in Chicago, 55-year-old Mason Cooper finally had enough money saved to pursue his lifelong dream. As he drove down the dusty road leading to the notorious Blackwater Ranch in Wyoming, doubt crept into his mind. The property was being sold at half its market value, a price too good to refuse, but the locals' warnings echoed in his ears. "That place is cursed, mister. Has been for 20 years, the elderly shopkeeper had told him when Mason stopped for supplies in the nearby town of Ridgeline, all because of that white bull. Nobody can tame him and nobody can stay. Mason had chuckled politely, attributing the warning to small-town superstition. But as his truck approached the dilapidated entrance gate, the vastness of the 500-acre property and its palpable abandonment gave him pause. The once grand ranch house stood weathered but solid on a gentle hill, overlooking neglected pastures and collapsed fencing. He parked and stepped out, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of a stream and the occasional cry of an eagle. Despite its rundown state, the land held undeniable beauty and potential. "You must be the new owner," a voice called from behind. Mason turned to find a woman on horseback, her posture straight and commanding. She wore practical riding clothes, her auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. Though probably in her late 40s, her face carried the weathered confidence of someone who had faced the elements all her life. "Mason Cooper," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Alexandra Rivers," she replied, dismounting gracefully but not taking his offered hand. "I own Rushing Waters Ranch next door." She gestured to the extensive property visible beyond the eastern boundary. "I've come to see what kind of fool would buy this place without knowing its history." Mason's smile remained steady. "I'm familiar with the stories." "Stories?" Alexandra scoffed. "That white bull has driven out 3 families in the past decade alone. The last owner left his furniture behind. He was so desperate to escape." "The realtor mentioned a troublesome bull," Mason acknowledged. "Troublesome?" She laughed, the sound sharp against the quiet landscape. "Blizzard isn't just troublesome. He's a force of nature, 2,000 pounds of pure defiance. He was born wild on this land and seems to believe it's his, not yours." Mason studied her, sensing there was more to her visit than neighborly concern. "Is there something you wanted, Ms. Rivers?" Alexandra's eyes narrowed slightly. "I made offers on this property 3 times, all rejected. The old owner, Winston, was stubborn even when facing bankruptcy." "And why were you interested?" Mason asked, genuinely curious. "My family's ranch needs the water rights that come with this land," she answered frankly. "The drought cycles are getting worse. Your eastern pasture has natural springs that would secure my operation's future." Mason nodded, understanding the practical concern. Water was life in ranching country. "Well," Alexandra continued, turning back to her horse, "when Blizzard runs you off like all the others, my offer still stands. I'll give you what you paid, no more." As she prepared to mount, a gleam of challenge flashed in her eyes. "Unless, of course, you can do what no one else has managed. If you tame that white bull, I'll double my offer." A small sardonic smile played at her lips. "In fact, I'd be so impressed, I might even accept that dinner invitation you haven't worked up the courage to extend." Before Mason could respond, Alexandra was back in the saddle, turning her horse toward her property. "Welcome to Wyoming, Mr. Cooper. We'll see how long you last." Mason watched her ride away, her confidence both irritating and oddly compelling. He turned back to survey his new home, wondering where the infamous bull might be hiding. It took Mason a week to properly settle in. He hired local workers to help repair the most critical infrastructure: the roof, the well pump, and portions of the fence line. Word had spread quickly about the city man who had bought Blackwater Ranch, and most locals regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. During that first week, Mason saw no sign of Blizzard. But evidence of the bull's presence was everywhere. Broken fences repaired multiple times, gouged tree trunks, and the wariness with which the repair crews approach certain parts of the property. He stays mostly in the North Woods and the High Meadow, explained Ray, the most experienced of the local ranch hands Mason had hired. Comes down to the creek at dawn and dusk. Nobody gets close to him, boss. Not if they want to stay healthy. On his 8th morning, Mason woke before sunrise. He made a thermos of coffee, dressed warmly, and headed toward the creek that cut through the northern section of his property. He chose a large boulder near the water's edge, settled comfortably, and waited. The first golden rays of sunlight were just breaking over the eastern mountains when Mason heard it, a deep snort, followed by the heavy rhythm of hooves. He remained perfectly still as Blizzard emerged from the tree line. Even prepared by the stories, Mason felt his breath catch. The bull was magnificent. Pure white except for a single black patch over his right eye, Blizzard stood taller and more muscular than any bull Mason had ever seen. His horns curved elegantly but dangerously from his massive head, and his eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. The bull stopped abruptly when he noticed Mason, nostrils flaring. For several tense moments, they simply regarded each other across 30 yards of open ground. Mason made no sudden movements, no attempt to approach. He simply sipped his coffee and observed. Blizzard pawed the ground once, twice, then let out a warning bellow that echoed across the valley. Mason didn't flinch. After what seemed like an eternity, the bull lowered his head slightly and moved toward the creek, keeping a wary eye on the human intruder. He drank quickly, then retreated back into the forest without further confrontation. This became Mason's morning ritual. Each day he would arrive before dawn, sit in the same spot and wait. Sometimes Blizzard wouldn't appear at all. Other times the bull would emerge but retreat immediately upon seeing Mason. But gradually, over weeks, the distance between them decreased. 30 yards became 20, then 15. Mason never approached, never tried to corner or capture. He simply existed in Blizzard's space, respectful and patient. Meanwhile, Alexandra Rivers kept a close eye on her new neighbor. Twice a week, she would ride along their shared boundary, ostensibly checking her own fences but clearly monitoring Mason's progress. Occasionally, they would exchange brief formal greetings, but she remained skeptical of his staying power. "You know," she called out one afternoon, seeing Mason repairing a fence line alone, most men would have brought in professional rodeo wranglers by now to subdue that bull. Mason straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm not most men." "Clearly," she replied, her tone unreadable. "What exactly is your strategy? Bore Blizzard into submission with your daily meditation sessions?" Mason smiled. "You've been watching closely." A faint color touched Alexandra's cheeks, but her expression remained impassive. "It's a small community. People talk." "I don't have a strategy," Mason admitted, setting down his tools and walking toward her. "I'm just getting to know him, understanding his patterns, his preferences. He's not a person, Mr. Cooper. He's a dangerous animal." "He's territorial and cautious," Mason countered. "But I haven't seen evidence that he's malicious. The others tried to dominate him, to break his spirit. That's not my intention." Alexandra studied him with newfound curiosity. "And what is your intention?" Mason looked out over the land that was slowly beginning to feel like home. "To create something sustainable here, something that respects what came before me." For the first time, Alexandra's expression softened slightly. "Noble sentiments. But sentiments don't stop 2,000 pounds of charging bull." "No," Mason agreed. "Trust does." Alexandra shook her head, but Mason caught the ghost of a smile before she turned her horse away. "Your funeral, Cooper," she called over her shoulder. "Or your triumph. Either way, I'll be watching." As she rode away, Mason wondered why her opinion had come to matter so much to him in such a short time. There was something about Alexandra Rivers, her strength, her connection to this land, that resonated with what he was trying to build. Or perhaps, he admitted to himself, it was simply the challenge in her eyes that he couldn't resist. The true test came on a crisp autumn morning, 3 months after Mason's arrival. The ritual at the creek had evolved to the point where Blizzard would graze calmly 20 feet away, while Mason drank his coffee. But on this particular day, Mason had brought something new, a rope. Mason didn't approach Blizzard with the rope. Instead, he simply laid it on the ground beside him as he took his usual position on the boulder. The bull noticed immediately, his massive head rising, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar object. For a moment, tension crackled in the air between them. Blizzard took several steps backward, eyes never leaving the coiled rope. "It's all right," Mason said softly, his voice barely audible above the gurgling creak. "Nothing's changing today," and nothing did. Mason left the rope untouched throughout their silent morning communion. The next day he brought it again. And the next. By the 5th day, Blizzard barely glanced at the rope when he emerged from the trees. On the 7th day, Mason held the rope loosely in his hands. Blizzard stopped at the edge of the clearing, his powerful body tense. Mason remained still, breathing evenly, waiting. After several minutes, the bull cautiously approached the creek, though he kept more distance than usual. Progress continued in these minute increments. A week later, Mason stood holding the rope while Blizzard drank from the creek. Another week, and he could walk slowly around the periphery of their shared space, rope in hand, while the bull watched, but didn't flee. Word spread through Ridgeline. The city slicker was making progress where others had failed. Some locals dismissed it as temporary luck. Others began to watch with genuine interest. But no one was more intrigued than Alexandra Rivers. One misty morning in late October, Mason arrived at the creek to find Alexandra already there, sitting on his boulder. She wore a sheepskin jacket against the autumn chill, her breath visible in the cold air. "I had to see for myself," she said without preamble. Mason hesitated, concerned about how Blizzard would react to a second human presence. "He might not come with you here. Then I'll have my answer about your progress, won't I?" Alexandra's tone was challenging, but her eyes held genuine curiosity. Mason sighed and took a position several feet away from her. They waited in silence as dawn gradually illuminated the landscape. Just as Mason began to think Alexandra's presence had indeed scared the bull away, a familiar snort echoed from the tree line. Blizzard emerged cautiously, immediately spotting the second human. He stopped, head high, muscles visibly tense beneath his white coat. Mason remained perfectly still, silently willing the bull to recognize that there was no threat. For 5 long minutes, nobody moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Blizzard lowered his head and approached the creek, though he chose a spot farther downstream than usual. He drank quickly, keeping both humans in his sight, then retreated back to the forest with measured steps. "My God," Alexandra whispered once the bull had disappeared. "He actually came." Mason allowed himself a small smile. "We're building trust." "How long before you can actually touch him?" "Lead him?" "I don't know," Mason admitted. "That's up to him. Could be weeks. Could be months." Alexandra studied him with new respect. "You're not what I expected, Cooper." "And what did you expect?" "Another real estate speculator looking to flip the property once the bull problem was solved." Her gaze was direct, assessing. "But you're actually building something here." "The repairs, the new seedling orchard, the solar panels on the barn. You're planning to stay?" Mason nodded. "I spent 30 years in corporate finance, helping others build their dreams while deferring my own. I'm not here temporarily, Alexandra." "Alex," she corrected him. "My friends call me Alex." The simple concession felt like a victory more significant than his progress with Blizzard. They walked back to the ranch house together, and for the first time Alex accepted Mason's offer of coffee. Inside, she moved around his kitchen with surprising familiarity. "The previous owners had the same layout," she explained, reaching unerringly for mugs in a specific cabinet. "I used to visit Eleanor Winston before they left." Mason leaned against the counter, watching her. "You knew them well?" Alex's expression clouded. "We were close once. Winston and my father were childhood friends. We helped each other through harsh winters, shared equipment." She poured coffee into both mugs. "Until the bull incident, what really happened?" Mason asked. "I've heard so many versions." Alex sighed, handing him a mug. "Charles Winston, their son, was determined to break Blizzard. The bull was younger then, already difficult, but not yet legendary. Charles was a rodeo champion with more pride than sense." She stared into her coffee. "He tried to rope Blizzard during a thunderstorm. The bull panicked, dragged Charles halfway across the property. Was he seriously injured? Broken leg, broken pride. The family sold most of their livestock after that. Started struggling financially. When I offered to buy the property, Winston took it as charity, refused outright. Alex's expression hardened. Stubborn old man nearly bankrupted his family over pride. Mason absorbed this, understanding better the complex history of Blackwater Ranch. And your interest in the water rights? It's not just business, Alex admitted. This valley was once a single property, owned by my great-grandfather. Over generations it was divided, sold in pieces. My family managed to hold on to rushing waters, but we've always felt that the land belongs together. Her eyes met his. Water flows across property lines, Mason. Dividing it is unnatural. The conviction in her voice struck him. For Alex, this wasn't just about resources. It was about legacy, about wholeness. I understand the importance of water rights, Mason said carefully, but I'm not looking to sell right now. Alex nodded, not surprised. I figured as much. But my offer about Blizzard still stands. The dinner invitation? Mason asked with a slight smile. That too. A rare smile crossed Alex's face, transforming her practical beauty into something that made Mason's breath catch. Though I'm beginning to think I might accept regardless of the bull's status. Over the next few weeks, a tentative friendship developed between them. Alex would stop by with practical gifts, a winter weather almanac, specialty feed recommendations, introductions to reliable local vendors. Mason recognized these as the precious currency of rural life, knowledge and connections. In return, he consulted her on his renovation plans, valued her input on sustainable practices, and occasionally helped with mechanical issues at her ranch. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He learned about her brief failed marriage to a rodeo circuit rider who couldn't settle down. She discovered his decades-long dream of rural self-sufficiency, born during childhood summers at his grandfather's modest farm in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, Mason's patient communion with Blizzard continued to evolve. By mid-November, he could stand within 10 feet of the bull. By early December, Blizzard would accept apple slices placed on a flat rock, waiting until Mason stepped back before approaching to eat them. The breakthrough came during the first heavy snowfall of winter. Mason trudged through knee-deep snow to reach their meeting place, concerned that the bull might be struggling in the harsh conditions. He found Blizzard already at the creek, pawing at the ice to reach water. Without thinking, Mason approached the frozen edge, used his boot heel to break through the ice, creating a drinking hole. Then he stepped back, realizing too late how close he had come to the bull. Blizzard raised his head, steam billowing from his nostrils in the frigid air. Mason stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, with deliberate movements, the bull approached the drinking hole Mason had created. He drank deeply, then, instead of retreating, took a step toward Mason. They stood facing each other, barely 6 feet apart. Mason could see the individual snowflakes melting on the bull's white coat, could feel the animal's warm breath in the cold air. Slowly, moving as if in a dream, Mason extended his hand, palm up. Blizzard regarded the offered hand, then, in a moment Mason would remember for the rest of his life, extended his massive head and briefly touched his wet nose to Mason's palm. The contact lasted only seconds before the bull withdrew, turning unhurriedly back toward the forest. But something fundamental had shifted between them. That evening, Mason drove through the snowstorm to Alex's ranch. Her eyebrows rose in surprise when she opened the door to find him on her porch, snow dusting his shoulders. "He touched me," Mason said simply, his voice filled with quiet wonder. Alex didn't need to ask who. She pulled him inside, sat him by the fire and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Tell me everything," she insisted, her eyes bright with shared excitement. As Mason recounted the morning's events, Alex listened intently, asking questions about Blizzard's body language, his response patterns. It struck Mason how deeply she cared about the animal's welfare, despite her practical interest in the property. "You don't see him as a nuisance, do you?" he asked suddenly. "Not really." Alex was silent for a moment, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "I see him as part of this valley's soul," she finally admitted. "Difficult, yes. Inconvenient for human plans, absolutely. But also magnificent, uncompromising." She met Mason's gaze. "This land shapes those who live on it. Blizzard understands that better than most humans." "Including me?" Mason asked, half joking. "No," Alex said softly. "I think you understand it too. That's why he's beginning to accept you." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared values that ran deeper than property lines or business transactions. Mason set down his glass and moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Alex," he said, quietly, "I think there might be another way to unify this valley." Her eyes widened slightly as she understood his meaning. Then, with the directness that was so characteristic of her, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a kiss of certainty, of recognition. Two people who had spent decades learning who they were, now discovering each other. When they separated, Alex's practical nature reasserted itself. "This doesn't change my interest in the water rights," she said, though her smile softened the statement. "I wouldn't expect it to," Mason replied, smiling back. "But it might change how we approach the problem." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their connected properties in a single blanket of white, while inside, warmth spread between two people who had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. Spring arrived in Wyoming with explosive greenery and wildflowers that transformed the valley. Mason's progress with Blizzard had become the talk of Ridgeline. The legendary white bull now allowed Mason to walk beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly accepting his presence. Mason never used a rope or halter, never attempted to constrain the magnificent animal. Their relationship was based on mutual respect, not dominance. Mason's relationship with Alex had blossomed as well, though both maintained their independence. They spent evenings together, alternating between their homes, sharing meals and plans, and increasingly, their hopes for the future. Together, they began developing a comprehensive water management system that would benefit both properties, with Alex's generations of local knowledge complementing Mason's innovative approaches and financial resources. "We could make this valley a model of sustainable ranching," Alex said one evening as they sat on Mason's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Something that honors the land instead of just extracting from it." Mason nodded, his hand finding hers. "I've been thinking about heritage breeds, livestock that thrived here before industrial agriculture took over." "Highland cattle would do well on your north slopes," Alex agreed. "And there's a heritage apple orchard program through the university that's looking for test sites." Their shared vision was coming together, piece by piece. They were careful not to rush their personal relationship, both having learned from past experiences that solid foundations required time. But the direction was clear to everyone in the community. Mason Cooper and Alexandra Rivers were building something together, both between their ranches and between themselves. The first challenge came on a bright May morning. Mason arrived at his ranch house after an overnight stay at Alex's to find a sleek black SUV parked in his driveway. A man in an expensive suit leaned against it, consulting his phone. "Mason Cooper," the stranger called as Mason parked his truck. "That's right," Mason confirmed, approaching cautiously. Unexpected visitors were rare in these parts. "Elliot Winston," the man introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. "Charles Winston's son." Mason shook the offered hand, immediately connecting the name to the family that had previously owned Blackwater Ranch. "What can I do for you, Mr. Winston?" Elliot's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've recently been reviewing my grandfather's estate and came across some interesting documentation regarding this property." He removed a folder from his briefcase. "It seems there were certain mineral rights that were never legally transferred during your purchase." Mason frowned. "My lawyers were very thorough. All rights were included in the sale. Surface rights, yes. Water rights, yes." Elliot's tone was smooth, practiced, but there was a separate mineral rights agreement from the 1950s that was never properly dissolved. My grandfather may not have been aware of it himself when he sold to you." Mason accepted the folder, scanning the documents inside. They appeared to be legitimate legal papers, though the language was dense with legal terminology. "Why bring this to me directly?" Mason asked. "Why not have your lawyer contact mine?" Elliot spread his hands in a gesture of apparent openness. "I believe in straightforward business, Mr. Cooper. These rights could be valuable. Preliminary geological surveys suggest significant natural gas deposits. Rather than lengthy litigation, I'm offering to purchase the entire property back at a 20% premium over what you paid." Mason kept his expression neutral, though alarm bells were ringing. "That's generous, but I'm not interested in selling." Perhaps you should consider it carefully, Elliot suggested, his friendly demeanor cooling slightly. Development of these mineral rights would involve significant disruption. Drilling equipment, access roads, workers, not exactly compatible with your rural lifestyle. The threat was thinly veiled. Mason handed the folder back. I'll have my lawyer review these claims. In the meantime, I'll ask you to leave my property. Elliot accepted the folder with a tight smile. Of course. My card is inside should you reconsider. I'll be in town for the week. As he opened his car door, he added, I should mention I've already discussed potential development with the county commissioners. Several were quite enthusiastic about the tax revenue potential. After Elliot departed, Mason immediately called Alex. She arrived within 30 minutes, her face tight with concern. Winston's grandson? She repeated incredulously after Mason explained. I remember Elliot vaguely. He visited maybe twice while growing up. Complete city kid, wanted nothing to do with the ranch. He seems very interested now, Mason observed grimly. Alex paced the kitchen. This makes no sense. Charles Winston died 5 years ago in a car accident in Denver. His father sold this place because he couldn't maintain it alone. Why would Elliot suddenly appear with mineral rights claims? Could there be truth to it? Separate mineral rights from the 1950s? Alex frowned. It's possible, but unlikely. Wyoming has complex mineral rights laws. But my father was meticulous about checking property histories. She stopped pacing. We need to talk to Mabel Johnson. Who? County clerk for 35 years before retiring. If anyone knows the true history of every property in this valley, it's Mabel. They drove to a neat bungalow on the outskirts of Ridgeline. Mabel Johnson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, listened carefully to their story, her face growing increasingly troubled. Winston family. Mineral rights from the 1950s, she mused, tapping a finger against her lips. That doesn't sound right. The Blackwater property was owned by the Peterson family until 1978, when Winston Sr. bought it. Hope flickered in Mason's chest. So the claim is fraudulent. Mabel held up a cautioning hand. Let me check my records before we jump to conclusions. She disappeared into a back room, returning with a dusty ledger and a newer folder. I kept copies of the most important historical documents after retirement. Call it a hobby. For the next hour, they pored over property records, mineral claims, and county meeting minutes. Finally, Mabel sat back with a triumphant smile. Here it is. There was a mineral exploration agreement in 1953, but it was formally dissolved in 1962, after preliminary surveys showed no commercially viable deposits. She pointed to a yellow document with multiple signatures. Furthermore, when Winston purchased the property, the deed explicitly included all mineral rights. I have the transfer record right here. Relief washed over Mason. So Elliot's claim is false? Completely, Mabel confirmed. Though he might not know it himself if he's working from incomplete records. She hesitated. Farsi, or he's deliberately trying to intimidate Mason with false documentation, Alex finished, her voice hard. But why? Mason wondered. What's his real angle? The answer came the following day when Elliot Winston appeared at the Rushing Waters Ranch. Alex called Mason immediately. He's offering to buy my water rights, she reported, voice tight with anger. Says with the combined properties and rights, he could negotiate a much better deal with the natural gas company he represents. So that's it, Mason realized. He's a middleman trying to package the entire valley for resource extraction. He implied that your cooperation was already secured, Alex added, that you were just working out the details of your sale. Mason's jaw tightened. He's playing us against each other. They arranged to confront Elliot together at the local diner, a public setting where the community could witness the encounter. When they laid out the evidence of his fraudulent claims, Elliot's smooth facade cracked momentarily before he regained his composure. There seems to be some confusion, he said calmly. My legal team will need to review these alternative documents. There's no confusion, Mr. Winston, Mason stated firmly. You came to my property with falsified claims in an attempt to pressure me into selling. That's fraud. A misunderstanding at worst, Elliot countered, though sweat had appeared on his forehead. Certainly nothing that would stand up in court. Maybe not, Alex agreed, but your reputation in the energy industry might suffer if word gets out about your tactics. Wyoming may be rural, but our business community is tightly connected. The implied threat hit its mark. Elliot gathered his papers hastily. "I'll be in touch after consulting with my team," he said stiffly, then beat a hasty retreat from the diner. The confrontation might have ended there, if not for what happened the following dawn. Mason arrived at the creek for his morning ritual with Blizzard to find the area disturbed, tire tracks cutting through the mud, branches broken. Her sense of dread filled him as he followed the tracks deeper into the property. In a clearing half a mile from the creek, he found what he was looking for, and his heart nearly stopped. Blizzard lay on his side, breathing heavily, a tranquilizer dart still protruding from his flank. Nearby sat a large livestock trailer. Mason approached the bull carefully, rage building inside him. Blizzard's eyes were open but unfocused, his powerful body occasionally twitching as he fought the sedative. Mason gently removed the dart, examining it. Professional grade, the kind used by wildlife management teams. A noise from the trees alerted him. Two men emerged, stopping short when they spotted Mason. "This is private property," Mason said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you're attempting to steal my bull." "We have authorization," one man claimed, though he looked uncertain. "Guy named Winston hired us to relocate a dangerous animal." "The only dangerous elements here are you and whoever hired you," Mason replied, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. Don't leave unless you want theft and trespassing charges added to animal cruelty." The men exchanged glances, then surrendered without further argument. When Sheriff Daniels arrived, they quickly confessed that Elliot Winston had hired them to capture the white bull, claiming it was an aggressive animal that needed to be removed from the property he was in the process of purchasing. By afternoon, Elliot Winston was being escorted out of his hotel by the sheriff, facing multiple charges. Blizzard, gradually recovering from the sedative, had been examined by a veterinarian and deemed unharmed, though still groggy. Mason and Alex sat together on the porch of Blackwater Ranch as evening approached, processing the day's events. "He really thought he could just take Blizzard," Mason said, still stunned by the audacity. "Probably figured if the bull disappeared, you'd have one less reason to stay," Alex reasoned. "Plus there are unscrupulous private collectors who would pay a fortune for an animal with Blizzard's reputation." Mason shook his head. "How is he?" "Resting comfortably in the north pasture," Alex replied. She had been monitoring the bull while Mason dealt with the sheriff. "The vet says he'll be fully recovered by morning." Mason reached for her hand. "I couldn't have handled this without you." Alex squeezed his fingers. "That's what partners do, Cooper." After a moment, she added more softly, "And that's what we are, aren't we?" "Partners." Mason turned to her, suddenly certain of what he wanted, had wanted for months. "I think we're more than that, Alex. Or we could be." She met his gaze steadily, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "Are you asking me something specific, Mason Cooper?" "I'm suggesting that we make our partnership official," he said, heart pounding. "Merge our properties, our lives. Not because of water rights or land value, but because together we're building something neither of us could create alone." Alex's eyes glistened in the fading light. "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal." "It is," Mason confirmed, suddenly dropping to one knee before her chair. "Alexandra Rivers, will you marry me?" For a moment, Alex simply stared at him, emotions playing across her usually composed face. Then she laughed, a joyful, uninhibited sound that echoed across the valley. "Well," she said, pulling him up and into her arms, "you did tame the untamable. I suppose I have to keep my end of the bargain." Their kiss was witnessed only by the mountains and the setting sun, and, perhaps, by a white bull grazing peacefully in a distant pasture, finally at home on the land he had always protected. 5 years passed, transforming Blackwater and Rushing Waters into a single, thriving operation that locals now simply called the Rivers Cooper Ranch. The wedding had been a community celebration, held outdoors with Blizzard himself, making an appearance at the edge of the gathering, a sight that became the stuff of local legend. Mason and Alex had systematically implemented their vision for sustainable ranching. Their water management system had proven so effective that neighboring properties began adopting similar practices. The Heritage Apple Orchard now produced specialty fruit that commanded premium prices at organic markets, while their conservation-focused grazing methods had restored native grasslands to health. Most remarkably, Blizzard had become an unexpected ambassador for their work. The once feared bull now tolerated guided visits from university agriculture students and environmental researchers, though always under Mason's watchful eye and with strict protocols. Videos of the magnificent white bull and the man who had earned his trust had gone viral online, bringing unexpected attention to their sustainable ranching methods. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when Mason had first arrived at Blackwater Ranch, he and Alex sat at their kitchen table, reviewing plans for a new educational center on the property. "The grant committee was impressed with our proposal," Alex said, shuffling through the approval paperwork. "Full funding for the building, plus the first 3 years of operational costs." Mason nodded, studying the architectural drawings. "It'll transform what we can offer. Hands-on workshops, residential programs, proper classroom space. And housing for interns," Alex added. "We won't have to turn away qualified applicants anymore." Their success had grown organically from their complementary strengths. Alex's deep local knowledge and connections paired perfectly with Mason's financial expertise and innovative thinking. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a working model of rural sustainability that respected tradition while embracing thoughtful progress. The sound of a car approaching interrupted their planning session. Through the window, they spotted an unfamiliar black sedan pulling up beside their ranch truck. "Are we expecting anyone?" Mason asked, rising from his chair. Alex checked her phone calendar. "Not until the university group this afternoon." They stepped onto the porch together as a woman emerged from the car. She appeared to be in her early 30s, professionally dressed but with practical boots suitable for the ranch environment. Something about her demeanor immediately put Mason on alert. She carried herself with the same confident authority he recognized in corporate executives. "Mr. Cooper." "Mrs. Rivers Cooper," the woman called, approaching with a practiced smile. "I'm Rebecca Harrington, Development Director with Westland Properties." Alex and Mason exchanged glances. Westland was one of the largest luxury resort developers in the western states, known for transforming rural areas into upscale vacation destinations. "What can we do for you, Ms. Harrington?" Alex asked, her tone politely neutral, though Mason could detect her immediate wariness. Rebecca's smile widened. "I'm here with an extraordinary opportunity. My company has been developing a concept for premium agricultural tourism experiences, and your operation has come to our attention as the perfect centerpiece for our pilot project." She produced a glossy folder from her briefcase, opening it to reveal professional renderings of a transformed Rivers Cooper ranch. The images showed luxurious cabins scattered across their property, a large central lodge where their modest educational building was planned, and manicured trails crisscrossing the landscape. "We're prepared to make an extremely generous offer," Rebecca continued smoothly. "Westland would purchase the property outright, but you would remain as the public face of the operation, authentic local experts guiding our high-end clientele through curated ranching experiences." Mason studied the renderings with growing concern. These plans show substantial development across the entire property. "Environmentally sensitive development," Rebecca quickly assured them. "Our eco-luxury model maintains the appearance of natural landscapes while providing 5-star amenities." Alex's expression had hardened. "And what about our current operations? The Heritage Breeds program? The conservation grazing?" Rebecca's smile never faltered. "We would maintain select elements as demonstration features. The more photogenic aspects of your work." "And Blizzard?" Mason asked quietly. At this, Rebecca's enthusiasm peaked. "The White Bull would be our signature attraction. We envision a special viewing area where guests could safely observe him. Our marketing team believes he could become an iconic brand symbol for the entire experience." Mason carefully closed the folder and handed it back. "Ms. Harrington, we appreciate your interest, but we're not looking to sell or convert our operation into a tourist attraction." Rebecca appeared genuinely surprised by the immediate rejection. "Perhaps I haven't made the financial component clear enough. Westland is prepared to offer 3 times the current market value of your combined properties." "The answer is still no," Alex stated firmly. "What we're building here isn't for sale at any price." Rebecca's professional demeanor slipped slightly. I encourage you to consider this opportunity carefully. The reality is that traditional ranching is becoming increasingly unsustainable economically. Our model offers a way to preserve aspects of the lifestyle while creating significant wealth. Our operation is profitable and growing, Mason countered. More importantly, it's fulfilling its purpose, demonstrating that rural livelihoods can be both economically viable and environmentally responsible. Rebecca seemed genuinely perplexed by their resistance. Would you at least agree to host some of our investors for a tour? Once they see the potential firsthand— No, Alex interrupted with finality. Our ranch is not a development opportunity. After Rebecca departed, promising to reach out again when they'd had time to reconsider, Mason and Alex walked together toward the north pasture, where Blizzard usually spent his afternoons. At 10 years old, the bull remained impressive, though slightly less imposing than in his prime. This won't be the last offer, Mason observed as they leaned against the fence, watching Blizzard graze peacefully among the younger cattle. No, Alex agreed. Success makes you visible, and visibility attracts people who want to capitalize on what you've built. Are we being stubborn? Mason wondered aloud. 3 times market value is significant money. We could do a lot of good with those resources. Alex turned to him, her expression serious. Do you regret what we've created here? Not for a second, Mason answered without hesitation. Then we're not being stubborn. We're being faithful to our vision. Alex's gaze swept across the flourishing landscape they'd carefully stewarded. Money can't build this again somewhere else. This is about relationship, with the land, with the animals, with the community. Mason nodded, understanding completely. Their work wasn't just about sustainable agriculture or profitable ranching. It was about demonstrating a different way of relating to the natural world, one based on patience and mutual respect, rather than dominance and extraction. Speaking of relationships, Alex said, her tone softening, Emily called this morning before you woke up. She's definitely coming home for Thanksgiving and bringing that environmental science professor she's been telling us about. Mason smiled at the mention of their foster daughter. Emily had come into their lives 3 years earlier, a troubled teenager from Ridgeline, whose single mother had struggled with addiction. What began as an emergency temporary placement had evolved into a permanent family bond. Now in her 2nd year of college, Emily was thriving, following in Alex's footsteps with her interest in environmental management. Should we be preparing for a serious introduction? Mason asked, raising an eyebrow. She wasn't saying so directly, but I got that impression, Alex replied with a knowing smile. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a ranch truck driven by Miguel, their operations manager. He pulled up beside the fence, rolling down his window. The university group just called, he reported. They're running about 30 minutes early. Should I have them wait in town? No, send them up to the main house, Alex decided. I'll meet them there. As she departed with Miguel, Mason remained by the fence, contemplating their visitor's proposal and their immediate rejection of it. The development renderings had been beautiful, carefully designed to appeal to modern sensibilities about luxury and nature. Yet they had represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what made this place special. Blizzard seemed to sense Mason's contemplative mood, ambling over to the fence with the unhurried confidence of an animal that knew it was respected. After 5 years, the bull still maintained his independence, never fully domesticated, but he had formed a remarkable bond with Mason based on mutual trust. What do you think, old friend? Mason asked softly, reaching out to stroke the bull's massive forehead, a privilege Blizzard granted to no one else, not even Alex. Should we sell out and get rich? The bull snorted, shaking his impressive horns. Mason laughed. My thoughts exactly. By the time Mason returned to the main house, Alex was already leading the university group on a preliminary tour. He joined them, falling easily into their well-practiced routine of sharing their story and methods. The students were particularly interested in their water conservation system, which had become even more relevant as climate change brought increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns to the region. The key principle is working with natural water flows rather than against them, Mason explained as they examined the network of retention ponds and gravity-fed irrigation channels. We're essentially mimicking beaver dam systems on a larger scale. And the financial investment? Asked a sharp-eyed graduate student. What's the payback period on infrastructure like this? About 7 years for direct cost recovery, Mason replied. But if you factor in ecosystem services and increased drought resilience, the return is immediate. As the day progressed, Mason found himself reflecting on how naturally he had adapted to this life, how completely it fulfilled him compared to his decades in corporate finance. The challenges were different, but no less complex. Integrating economic viability with environmental stewardship required constant innovation and adaptation. That evening, after the university group had departed laden with data samples and case study notes, Mason and Alex sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in golden purple. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that comes from years of shared purpose and deep understanding. "I got a call from Senator Wilkins' office today," Alex said finally. "They want us to testify before the State Agricultural Committee about our water management system. There's a bill being considered that would provide tax incentives for similar conservation practices." Mason nodded. That could make a significant difference for smaller operations that can't absorb the initial investment costs. "It's funny," Alex mused. "When I challenged you about Blizzard all those years ago, I never imagined we'd end up influencing state policy." Mason smiled, taking her hand. "And I never imagined that losing my temper at a corporate board meeting would lead me to the most fulfilling work of my life." The incident seemed distant now, the final straw that had prompted his resignation and the pursuit of his long-deferred dream. A heated argument over prioritizing quarterly profits over sustainable business practices had crystallized everything wrong with the path he'd been following. "The best kind of success is the kind you never anticipated," Alex said, leaning against his shoulder. "The kind that emerges naturally from doing what you believe in." In the fading light, they could just make out Blizzard's white form in the distance, a ghostly presence moving steadily through the twilight landscape. The bull that many had feared, that some had tried to control through force, now moved freely across the land he had always protected, accepting human presence without surrendering his essential nature. Like the white bull, Mason and Alex had found their own way forward, not by conquering or being conquered, but by building something together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared values. Their legacy wasn't just in the thriving ranch or the innovative practices they'd developed, but in the example they set of a different relationship with the land and with each other. As darkness settled over the valley, lights began to twinkle from neighboring ranches. Many of those properties now implemented elements of the river's Cooper approach, creating a patchwork of gradually healing land across the region. It wasn't just one ranch anymore, but an evolving community vision. "We should probably finalize those educational center plans tomorrow," Alex said, her practical nature never far from the surface. "If we want to break ground before winter, we will," Mason assured her, drawing her closer. "But tonight, let's just enjoy what we've already built." Around them, the Wyoming night unfurled its starry canopy, while beneath it, the land they had nurtured continued its quiet processes of renewal. In the distance, Blizzard settled in his favorite resting spot near the creek, where trust had first been established, a silent guardian of a place where patience had proven stronger than force, and where understanding had created something that force never could. Years later, the river's Cooper Ranch had become a landmark, not just in Wyoming, but across the agricultural community nationwide. Their educational center hosted visitors from around the world, from small family farmers to government officials to environmental researchers. What had begun as one man's attempt to connect with a legendary white bull had evolved into a movement that was gradually changing perceptions about the relationship between humans, animals, and the land. Blizzard lived to a remarkable age for his species, remaining a symbol of wild dignity even in his final years. When he finally rested beneath his favorite oak tree near the creek, the community gathered to honor him. A bronze statue was erected at the entrance to the educational center, capturing the moment of first trust, a man with an outstretched hand, a powerful bull choosing to approach. The inscription read simply, "True strength is found in patience, not force." Mason and Alex continued their work well into their senior years, gradually transitioning leadership to Emily and a team of dedicated young people who had trained under their guidance. The property they had unified became a legally protected heritage ranch, its innovative practices and conservation values secured for generations to come. The legend of the White Bull and the man who earned his trust became part of the cultural fabric of the region, a story told and retold, evolving with each telling, but always preserving its essential truth, that the most meaningful connections are not formed through domination, but through respect and understanding. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when mist clings to the valley floor, visitors swear they can see a white shape moving through the northern pastures, a ghostly guardian still watching over the land and the legacy he helped create. Dear listeners, we hope Mason and Alexandra's journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that true strength isn't found in dominance, but in patience and mutual respect, whether with animals, the land, or the people we love. If you were moved by the White Bull's story and the ranch that became a beacon of sustainable living, we've prepared a special playlist of equally captivating tales about unexpected connections and transformative relationships. You'll find it by clicking the link to the left. Did this story of patience and perseverance resonate with you? Has an animal ever changed your life in a meaningful way? We'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to help us continue bringing these heartfelt stories to more listeners. Every day we share unique narratives that explore life's complexities and remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most powerful connections begin with a simple moment of trust, just like Mason and his untamable white bull.